Hello guys, it's LeopoldvonCarstein and today I will present you the guide to the 5 Kastelan build, the updated version. Basically a lot of the stuff is the same as with the 4 Kastelan build that I have posted a while ago on Steam. Some of the changes that came back in Season of Inferno were the addition of enchants for constructs. Some of them work 100%, some of them probably work, and one of them doesn't work right now, so I will talk about it a bit later. Also, there are new ancient weapons of wisdom, of robotics, and of leadership that give you additional 15% reduced data Flux Reserve, which can get you to at least 4 constructs, 4 Kastelan constructs, or if you have both the weapon and the proper armor, they can get you up to 5 Kastelans, but I will also talk about that in a while. So, as to the attributes, right now I have I'll switch my weapons. I use 20-20-20, going from the lowest, the Mind Link. The difference in the 5 Kastelan build that I'm currently using is that I don't use the healing abilities of constructs because my data Flux Reserve is at 100%. So I had to find another way to keep them alive. So basically, because we have 100% data Flux Reserve and we don't have our AoE healing that we would normally use with 4 constructs, we don't need the last bonus from the Mind Link. It's useless for us. The 10% damage bonus for constructs is quite good, so if you can, just go for it. If you don't have enough points, then just drop it. The cooldown is not necessary that much for us. The HP and suppression is not needed for us, and the data flux gained on construct death is also not needed. So it's just the 10% damage bonus and the health bonus for constructs. For suppression, I go for 20 points. It's the reasonable amount for us. On higher difficulties we wanted the 5% all resists. We also want the damage reduction for our constructs to keep them alive. That's a must. And also we got 5% additional health for constructs, so it's good to have. Plus the suppression gained on hit. With logics I went mainly for the 10% movement speed and the base damage to test some other stuff, but mainly the movement speed. Like right now we are at 50%. If you want to move faster, you could just go with Stride of the Blast, get to 75%. In game it's actually 88%. I don't know why it shows 75 here. So as to the passives, there are some changes. We basically dropped all of the cooldown stuff and healing while getting data reserve back. So we don't need anything from where is it? We don't need anything really from the suppression support tree. What I did, the construct defense tree is pretty similar to the one that is posted on the Steam. No major changes. Actually, if you're quite early in your levels, like 50 or 60, you can just skip most of those passives here and go just for the necessary ones. So I would go like, I would take this one, this one, this one, this, and this. So those 5 points. And I would go here. So that would be my choice for the early levels. You don't really need those things. For construct offense, pretty standard, the same as on Steam. I went with the critical hits because I'm using the radium carbine with a sound code doctrine that adds 2 more bullets basically, so I'm making a lot of hits, a lot of critical hits, and as I don't have any other healing source, the 1% HP healed on critical hit is decent enough. For construct ability, standard 3, nothing really changed. With the debuffs tree I went just for the disorient, because we will use the blind perk here. So every time the enemy is blinded, it will be also shocked. And I went here for the effectiveness of shock and slow debuffs. What I tried to do is, because we lose a lot of synergy from data Flux Reserve and healing through the data flux spending, I had to go full on for the defense tree. We could stop somewhere around here without taking this portion, but I had some spare points, and actually there is not enough other passives that would benefit our construct, so I just went full on with the defense tree. It actually helps a bit on the higher difficulties. The radical tree is not necessary, but I'm just testing it right now. We don't need anything from health tree that much. I mean, I could probably swap this portion and go here just to get that additional suppression damage reduction. So the main thing is that for perks, obviously this one is a must-have. You could use the diversive tactics or switch to Stride of the Blessed for faster movement speed, or where is it? Go for the Blinded. It's a good synergy because Blinded reduces the enemy hit chance by 40%, sorry, and on higher difficulties it's basically the thing that holds our constructs alive. And as we are using the radium carbine, we are poisoning every target that we hit, so at the same time we are blinding them, and at the same time we are shocking them. So it's a good synergy. So as to the constructs, for those of you who don't know how it works, without the passive perk, the data flux reserve is 38%. With it, 28. If you have either the gun or where is the armor? If you have the gun or the armor, you will drop it to 20%. This way you can get 5 Kastelan robots. If you have both of those, your data reserve will drop to 13%. Most of you will think, okay, maybe now I can drop the perk and I can still field 5 Castellans. No, it's 23%. But there's a trick. There's always a trick in that game. So let me tell you about the trick that works really well, and it helps quite a lot. So if you have both of those items equipped or just one, set all the Castellans, set the weapons on them, equipment modules, then you can drop the armor. So I'm using that armor, and you can swap the data Flux Reserve for something more useful. So I'm going with Diversive Tactics. So that's the setup that I'm using at higher difficulties 100% of time. And what happens now? My data Flux Reserve is at 30% with the weapon, but I'm not using it. That's my main setup. 38 data Flux Reserve. So technically I couldn't field 5 Castellans, but how it works in the game is that you only need the data Flux Reserve to actually insert the 4th and 5th Castellan here on the construct setup. After that you can drop those items, you'll get into the game, you'll have 5 Castellans. Obviously we are above 100% data Flux Reserve, so we cannot heal them. But I found a way to live without it. So basically what I do, on each construct I sacrifice one offensor module for the regenerator module, which basically means that the constructs are self-healing a bit more. That way I don't have to heal them with the passives that I would normally use. It works quite well on in the normal scenarios that you will be playing, like the normal difficulty missions to up to +3 or +4 or +5. It doesn't matter, the Castellans won't even die, so the regeneration on its own will work wonders. On higher difficulties you need additional stuff to keep them alive, like the blind ability. So as to the setup, I'm using right now with the 5 construct setup 2 Castellans with melee weapons, basically for the Power Fist ability. So what you need to know with Strike and Cleave, so the Power Fist ability, they construct knock back or knock down enemies. It's really good for the elites, especially because they hit like trucks, and Castellans can keep them perma-stunned on the ground all the time. They also use Flamers because it's a good synergy. Flamer is a medium to... I mean, like, this ability is long range, this ability is medium range, but it works well in closed combat. So they are basically the utility guys slash holding the line guys, and next 3 are ranged. They are keeping their distance to the enemies most of the time, so they don't have to be as tanky, but right now I'm using the same setup on the same modules on all 5 of those. So as to the weaponry, there were many changes in Season of Inferno. First of all, weapons have damage, so it's really important to keep that damage as high as possible. If you're leveling your tech-adepts, remember to switch the weapons every 5 to 10 levels to keep the damage up. Other than that, we have additional enchants on the gear. Like right now, my first Kastelan is the utility guy, like I said. I use 2 very strong enchants Normally they are ridiculously overpowered, and I'm actually quite shocked that they are on the constructs. So every 10th enemy explodes on kill, dealing area damage equal to 100% of their HP. What that means is that every 10th enemy killed by the construct deals 100% of their HP damage to all the other enemies in the area, and what's even more important is that it does not take into account the difficulty level. So even if the mission has a modifier of minus 90% damage, it still hits each and every enemy in the area for 100% of the HP without any decreases. It's very strong. So I have that on the Flamer, I have that also on my Power Fist. As to the primary enchants, usually I go for the ones that give damage bonus for the construct, because this damage is added at the end of every other damage addition to the constructs, and it's obviously higher than, for example, the 7.9 damage. So I usually go for those ones, and with that setup, usually 99% of time all the enemies are burning. Most of the time they are also shocked or slowed. They are poisoned. So it's always good to choose those three sources, or those four sources. On the next one, he's the main damage dealer, melee damage dealer, so I went with damage bonus for every debuff on the target. Usually enemies have from 6 to 13, 14 debuffs, so it's a major boost. And I have it both on the hands, the fist, and the Flamer, so it's a massive boost. With the ranged construct, I use hallucination. I cannot get it from a different source, so it's a good choice. And I use the damage bonus debuff. Like, don't feel that it's mandatory to use exactly the same enchants on the exactly same constructs that I use. I'm just telling you which ones are worth it and which are not really worth it. On this one I have bleeding on hit. It's okay-ish. I mean, it adds another debuff, but probably I'll just switch to a gun that gives me debuffs. And I use this enchant. It's a bit weaker than every 10th enemy explodes, but if I can get the other one, I will get this one. And on the 5th construct I use poison on hit. Right now it's not really necessary because I did poison damage, but I didn't bother really to reroll it. I have also here other types of enchants, so just look what you can get. And I use again hallucination on hit. This one on paper could be also quite nice, but the debuff one is better. So as to the weapon modules, I use on every construct 2 offensor modules and 1 regenerator module. What is important is that if you look closer to this on the stats, mainly on the damage reduction, like 60% as far as I know is the cap, so we cannot go higher. So we have the basic damage reduction at 60%, but what we really need to keep our Kastelans alive is to also max the resistances. So with the resistances we get 50% warp resistance, plus we get Where is it? Where is it? Yeah. So we get 50% to warp resist, meaning we don't really need to push it that much from equipment modules, but we need to get physical resist and heat resist. So on each of my constructs I have the physical resistance enchant and the heat resistance. Plus also my tech-adept gear there are the resistance enchants, so that I can hit 60% resistance to warp, heat and physical on all Kastelans. The third slot is just right now it's random on my constructs. I mean, I wish I could get like a damage bonus for them, but it's really hard to get, so this one has stun. I have some other spare ones. I mean, this one potentially could be good. Here, yeah, here for example, this one is the best one. 24% damage bonus for the construct if equipped on Kastelan robot. And what's important is that you cannot get this by rerolling or crafting modules. You can get it only by dropping it. So remember it, it's important. As for tech-adept gear, basically there's not much you can do to increase our construct's damage. Like with the Season of Inferno, you can roll enchants, giving bonuses to constructs. In a way, it's really good, but because we have a way to actually increase our damage, our construct damage, our Kastelan damage. But the downside is that you have another 20 or so enchants to reroll in the pool. So for me, the grind was a nightmare. I used like 140 million of credits. I used like 2000 of Machine God Sparks, which are really rare to get and to hold on, because they are used to reroll everything, almost. And as you can see, I have a lot of red gear, so the costs are ridiculous. Like, look at the cost. So if I want to modify anything, for example the gun, 67,000 for one reroll, or 135,000 for the main enchant reroll. Also everything costs Machine God Sparks. Like look, I have like a ton of all of those materials. I even have a ton of Spark of Glories, but it's never enough with Machine God Sparks. So back to the gear. We can basically, there are two ways in which we can boost our constructs. Right now we can boost them by enchants and by adding vulnerability on the enemies. They don't have any critical chance, unfortunately, so our options are limited. So basically the gear for the tech-adept in this setup works like this, that we use half of the enchants to boost our defenses and the other half to boost our construct damage. There's 0 enchants that boost our damage. So the first one, the main implant, I went with the Season of Inferno special implant, the Lingering Embers, which increases the vulnerability effect duration by 200%. It really helps because the vulnerabilities now can hold almost for forever until the constructs kill the enemies. I went with dodge, resistance against ranged, because enemies rarely get to us in melee. I went with mining and resistances, and for the secondary slot, it's important to notice that on the main implant you can get the damage bonuses for constructs only in secondary slots. So I went with the hit one and the melee one. On the Eye of Combustion I went with hit vulnerability, just to increase the damage a bit further. I went with crit chance, but I don't really need it here. Movement speed, like on every piece of gear, if you can get movement speed, go for it. It helps, it increases the clearing speed. I went with suppression damage for constructs and the base damage for constructs. So this one is really useful, but unfortunately it doesn't work right now, which is reported, and I don't know when it will be fixed. With the main implant, shock on poison skill hit, just to add those vulnerabilities if I can. That's the best I could find, so right now I'm using it. And I went with my link logic and bionics plus resistances. The Psalm Code Doctrine is bonus HP for constructs. Purity Seal, I went with this enchant, which helps on the higher difficulties, and the standard damage reduction, damage for constructs, damage for all resistances, and again on the secondary enchants, bonuses for our constructs to the ranged and hit damage. I went with range and hit most of the time because from our 5 Kastelan constructs, only 2 weapons. The Power Fist use the melee and physical damage. All the other weapons use the range and hit damage. Also the AoE litany of Electromancer, I guess it was called like that, also uses the hit damage. For the belt I went with, again, shock on poison, movement speed, and here I went with the resistances, bonus resistances for my constructs. So if you remember from the construct modules, we get from plus 30 to plus 50 hit, and the same with physical resist. The other part I get from this gear piece. It's the best slot to use it, because we don't have on that belt anything that we really need that much, so it's useful to go with the resists on it. And I went here for the vulnerability debuff effectiveness, as again it's the only thing that the constructs benefit from. As to the armor, with the trick that I showed you, I don't need to use the Data Flux Reserve armor, so I use the one that gives me damage reduction per Kastelan, so it's almost 25% more damage reduction. I went with more HP for the constructs, resist for me, movement speed for me, dodge for me, and a bit more hit resist for constructs. I don't need it, so I probably will reroll it for something better in the future, but right now I don't have the luxury to reroll it right now. And for the Psalm Code Doctrine I went with damage bonus for constructs, but if you are struggling on the higher difficulties, I would advise you to switch it to the doctrine that gives you that stuns enemies on critical chance. That's the doctrine that you need to use. For the belt, 50% construct HP as Psalm Code Doctrine, 13 chance to shock on hit. Right now I couldn't reroll it for anything better, so I'm just sticking with it for now. Movement speed, bionics, inoculator capacity, and again physical resist. Later I'll reroll it to something more useful. The most important part for this setup is again using the weapon that gives you % of your current reserve converted to critical hit chance. So I have this one and I have this one. This way, even though my crit chance is 15%, it could be like 1 or 2%, doesn't matter. When I'm using this, it gives me, it gets me to the cap to 50%, and as far as I know, there might be a bug or something like this, but the crit chance goes so high that even with this Psalm Code Doctrine that gives me 2 more shots and reduces the critical chance by 30%, it's probably still above 50%, so we don't have problems with critical chance. As to the ancients, you want to go for the primary ones because they massively increase our construct damage. So just look here. And one more thing about the Psalm Code Doctrine is that why I went for it, basically for each shot that I make, it gives me 2 more projectiles. So I can hit more enemies. It shoots really fast, so basically I can just hit all the enemies in the area, just apply those vulnerabilities due to the diversive tactics, or if you don't use it due to the critical hit. If you don't use the diversive tactics, you could go for the impact necrosis, so that you can get the vulnerability for each critical hit you make. Or if you find the Plasma Caliver Alpha, which I couldn't unfortunately find, otherwise I would use it, you go for the hit attacks here. So if you're lacking points for this, you can drop the crit chance part and this top part of the defense tree and go either in hit attacks or physical attacks. And for the signums, I use again adding vulnerability on crit. Adding vulnerabilities faster is always beneficial, and adding the general vulnerability on hit. As for the other ancients, again, bonus to vulnerability effects, and the rest is bonuses for constructs, so base damage, suppression, physical, melee. I could probably, if I would get like 3 secondary slots, I would go for another source of damage, so for example ranged or hit. Yeah, so that's my basic setup. And again, one important thing that I probably didn't mention in the video, you always want to start with an alpha weapon. This way you can field 5 Kastelans at the start of the mission. After that, just switch to your main weapon that you will be using. So in my case it's the Radiant Carbine Beta. Okay, so thanks for watching, and if you have any useful information, any tips, insights or questions, just feel free to ask them in the comment section below. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Cheers!